Hi, this is the Dr. Deborah Show, and this is the show where we talk about bringing peace and calm into your life. Later in the show, we're going to be talking about mental health, well-being, and mental health stigma. We're live at KCSB FM Santa Barbara 91.9, and KCSB is a platform for cultural expression and thoughtful discussion, providing a diverse educational forum. And I'm a Santa Barbara-based clinical psychologist, and I specialize in pediatric neuropsychology. And during my clinical training and my current work, I've treated thousands of people, and I want to share my experiences with you. I'm also a UCSB alumni, and I live locally in Santa Barbara. And this show's all about our community and how to create compassionate conversations about our well-being and health. Again, I want to welcome our listeners to the Dr. Deborah Show. It's wonderful to have you with us. And as a reminder, this show is psychoeducational and is in the area of neuropsychology and well-being. It's not meant to replace professional mental health advice or therapy. So if you do believe you suffer from a particular disorder, please do reach out for professional help. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about mental health and well-being with a focus on suffering, with our very special guest, William Arntz. And I'm very, very excited to have William Arntz on because he's inspired me in many ways. William Arntz has started his professional career as a research laser physicist, working on Star Wars high-energy lasers. He then moved on to software, writing AutoSys, which is an automated job control system currently in use by most Fortune 500 companies. He sold that company, retired, and then decided to make a film, which is super awesome if you haven't seen it, creating, producing, and directing, and it's called What the Bleep Do We Know? It's an exploration of spirituality, quantum physics, neurology, and outrageous possibilities. The film and the companion book, with editions in over 20 languages, were international hits. William and his wife, mystic visionary Deirdre Hade, have collaborated on the new coffee table art book, The Not-So-Little Book of Surprises. As the mystic and the physicist, they are touring the country speaking on the power of surprise as an undiscovered key to awakening in this, the age of surprise. His most recent book, How to Suffer in 10 Easy Steps, takes on the self-help genre with the only how-to book that actually delivers. No one wants to suffer, but everyone does it. So it must be easy to do. Welcome to the show, William.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
And like I was saying, I'm just so excited to have William. I was telling him before the show that the movie that he made, What the Bleep Do We Know? If you haven't seen it, check it out. And also, he's got a new book he's going to talk about today, so that'll be fun to hear about. But he's just got so much of a variety of information that it's really stimulating to listen to him talk about his topics. And so here's what's next. We'll talk a little bit just about mental health, and then mental health and how that intersects with the power of surprise and also mostly how to suffer. And then we'll talk a little bit maybe about prevention awareness through suffering. It's kind of a funny way to say it, huh? Mm-hmm. And we're talking about mental health stigma today because mental health is the largest public health priority and the largest financial burden of any health issue in the world. That's according to the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. And in a Centers for Disease Control report called Attitudes Toward Mental Illness, they found that stigma and embarrassment are two of the top reasons why people with mental health issues don't seek help or medication. I also just like to emphasize everybody, issues surrounding mental health. We all have different mental health things that go on. So it's not like, I think that there's a new kind of idea about mental health, and that's just more of that, it's like a flu or a cold, or it can become more severe. But I think that we all have just different things that we need to work on to learn how to be more balanced. So hopefully this will help us learn how to do that with suffering. So I like to just talk briefly about what I think mental health is. I just simply put it as like a physiological balance, meaning our heart and our brain and our nervous system are beating and moving at a nice rate that's balanced, and that gives us a sense of inner peace. I was wondering, William, how would you describe mental health?
Well, boy, oh boy, how would I describe mental health? Well, when you using the word health, most of us think of physical health in a certain way. Physical health being that you can do the things you want to do when you want to do them. So mental health is more or less the same thing, is that if you want to go have a chat with a friend, you can go have a chat with a friend. If you want to go start a new project, you can go start a project. You're not overwhelmed by anxiety, feelings of dread, worry, all those type of things that would keep you from doing something. Just like physical health, if your back is out, you can't get out of bed. You're limited in doing that. So I would say mental health is the ability to do things within your realm that is what you want to do. And if you can't do that because of an internal state, then that's mental ill health.
Right. Well, then that limits you. I love that. That's great. So you're kind of saying that when we don't get to do the things that we enjoy and we get kind of bogged down by anxiety or bothersome thoughts or whatever the sundry is, that we can't get to go to do the things that we enjoy.
True.
Even though you put that in a little bit of a different word, but I like the way you're talking about that. So we're here exploring the relationship between mental health and also suffering. And excuse me, we're exploring kind of, I did do a little bit of research on surprise too, but I know we're going to not talk too much about surprise, but I just think that surprise does kind of go along with suffering, because I think when we suffer, right, we get surprises.
Well, generally, when you suffer, I mean, you get the phone call in the middle of the night and someone was in a car accident. I mean, that's an example of a surprise that's not good. And if it's someone you care about, there's a good chance you will suffer over that, because it puts you in a state of loss and that's, very painful. So the surprise can do that. I mean, there are also, of course, good surprises where you won the lottery. There's lots of good surprises. You've met someone and you call them up and they're happy to hear from you.
Right.
Whoa, yay.
I think there's something big physics-wise in that, because, I mean, like, you're thinking of someone and then the phone rings and then it's them. I know it seems like that's like string theory or something, but physics, I think we'll figure that out soon.
You mean like the two of us showing up at the same time when we were going to meet today?
That was very serendipitous, because as I was coming down to meet William, I could see, I was like, wow, that was really good timing.
It's just like we just walked in from the two sides of the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's kind of, there's probably some chemistry and other things too, but I just think there's some kind of pull, or something there too. And also I found when I was doing a little bit of research, because I usually research the topic, that there's a lot of brain boosting benefits to surprises. Including enhanced memory, increased happiness, strengthening our relationships, heightening our resilience, and greater opportunities to create and innovate. Probably creates a lot of creativity, right? If we let things kind of go and allow ourselves to explore.
The other thing that, because I know you like the neuro stuff, the other thing that it does, a lot of dopamine gets flooded in the brain, and then that increases neuroplasticity. And this is the place where surprise can help you change, because neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to rewire. And generally, we're stuck in our habits. You keep running down the same neural nets. You do the same thing, because a habit really gets hard-coded in the brain. When you have all that neuroplasticity, your brain can rewire very quickly. So if you're actually able to use that moment of surprise, let's say there's a habit you've been wanting to break and you've been wanting to do something else. Next time you're surprised, start doing the something else, and you can lay down a new neural pathway.
I know. That's what I teach people to do. It's true. Well, and what William's talking about with neuroplasticity is the idea we used to think the brain was hardwired. Now we know it's not. We can actually change our genetic code. In fact, I think, every 8 milliseconds or so, we're cycling through, kind of a response to our external or internal world. Then we have a body sensation, we have a feeling, we have memories and images from the past. We kind of come to a conclusion and then we act on that. And it's true. I think the hard part is intersecting that, because like the Dalai Lama, he says, it's kind of like going down a cow cart, and you get very deep grooves from the cow cart, and it's hard to jump onto another cow cart. But I do think that surprise can kind of maybe pave the way, because maybe it makes it more light or just approachable too, and new.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. It was saying in the research that surprise also improves our romantic relationships, and feeds our novelty bias, right? So, because the novelty of new things, that it intensifies our emotions and demands our attention and improves our mental health and puts us in a place of awe. I think it also brings us more present. Just, being surprised, because you kind of have to figure out what's going on and kind of evaluate from there.
Well, physiologically, in the old days, if suddenly there was a weird sound from behind you, you're like, oh, what is that? I don't know what it is. So I hope it's not the man-eating tiger I've been hearing about. And then you turn and know it was just a branch falling. It's like, oh, whew. And you look up and it was the man-eating tiger, knocked the branch down. Then you run. So, so we're hardwired, basically, that's in it, to at the moment of surprise. Amazing things happen. The stories of the grandmothers who they go out to watch their grandson change the tire on a car and the car falls on them and grandma picks up the car.
Right. That's like an endorphin, I think.
Yeah, and that's part of the whole surprise thing. And so...
Well, you never know I guess part of it is you never know what will happen.
Yep.
But also, it could be like maybe it's not a dragon. Maybe there's like a big bouquet of flowers there. It's also, I think traditionally human nature, we tend to think of the worst, like you're saying, and then we kind of just brace ourselves and then we don't even move toward the newness or the surprise because we just think, oh gosh, I don't want to try that out. But I encourage people to do that too because I think that's how we grow and evolve. Yeah, and you were talking about humor with surprise. Is that something you think that's an important element about when you learn to embrace surprise?
Yes. Humor... I have a cartoon in the new How to Suffer book. I have a bunch of cartoons in there, New Yorker type cartoons. And one is there are these guys, they're sitting around the boardroom and you see the thing of the company profits going way down and everyone's glum. And there's a guy who says, I just remind everyone that tragedy plus time equals comedy. And I've thought a lot about that. And a lot of the comedy you get is talking about these really bizarre situations. And most comedy comes about as a surprise. If you know the punchline's coming, it's not funny. Mm-hmm. But the whole thing about a punchline is it's like, oh, surprise ending. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that just light you up. So the other thing about humor is, of course, when you talk about a taboo, mm-hmm. Bringing a taboo out into the public, people will laugh about. I've noticed this in my interviews about this How to Suffer book. When you start talking about it, you say, how are you suffering? People laugh. They just, see, you just did it. You just proved my point. She's laughing now.
Yeah, I did. Actually, very naturally.
Yeah.
No, it's true. Well, because it's like, we've been so conditioned, too, with the idea of, like, all these self-help books, right, of how to do this and how to do that. So, there is something that is very taboo, right, about how to suffer. Because I think we're taught not to suffer, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, we're taught not to acknowledge it. We're told to, like, push it away. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, as you know, it gets down into the subconscious, and there it wreaks havoc.
Right. And, the thing is, I know people are very into compartmentalizing and putting things on little shelves and organizing things. But, I have something I call the compounding theory of stress. And it's like, we have something stressful happen. It could have been a long time ago. Or recently, we don't kind of deal with that. We kind of, like you're saying, put it away, push it down, and then something else stressful happens and another. And it's kind of like putting money in the bank, but the difference is that usually our nervous system, right, can only tolerate just a certain amount. And then we get what I call the kicker, which kicks us into this other place where people do get sick, physically, mentally, and in other ways. So I think actually, if we can learn to face those little smaller pieces, kind of like a little lapping wave, like waves in the ocean, I think mm-hmm. that's really a healthy way to do that. I think we all suffer, and yet we rarely address like the issue directly, like we're talking about. I think the one thing everyone does is rarely talk about it. That's kind of a common thing. So you're going to shock our system. But I think, we like to talk about the external events like people, conditions, but we hardly ever talk about the internal state of suffering itself. So I think bringing suffering out of the closet into light is what your book's all about, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep, I call it the gorilla. Suffering is the gorilla in the room. It affects so much of what we do, and it really motivates to make sure you don't suffer. People will go out, they want to find their true love so they don't suffer loneliness. They want to go make a ton of money so they don't suffer lack. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which suffering is this like unseen thing that drives so much of what we do, and yet we don't really look at it directly.
That's very true. Well, maybe your book will help us do that. I actually do encourage people in my practice, too, to actually welcome suffering. But it's so true. It's very embedded, like the idea, like move away from suffering. But, also physiologically and just on a physical level, I think that causes us to actually shirk and kind of pull away and brace ourselves, and we become very tense and tight and actually very disconnected from ourselves. So I like the humor piece, too, because, humor kind of makes you feel a little bit looser there, too.
Well, for the book, I mean, there's a lot. It started off actually as a satire of self-help books. That's really how this. Let me tell you how it started.
Sure.
Because you know Deirdre, you interviewed her. Deirdre, my wonderful wife. I was walking through the living room one evening, and she was laying on the couch face down. Her back was out, and I said, "Honey, do you want to go into the kitchen?" And no response. I said, "Well, Deirdre, you want to get maybe a little Chardonnay to cheer you up? What do you want to do?" And she kind of grunts. I said, "Deirdre," and she goes, "I just want to lay here and suffer." And I was so. No one says that, right? I said, "Really? What are you doing?" She goes, "I'm perfecting my suffering." And I start to laugh, and I say, "Someone should write a self-help book on perfecting suffering, how to suffer." And so we just started riffing on this thing and coming up with stuff. I'm like, there should be a Suffering Hall of Fame in the book, which there is. There's 10 easy steps to suffering, and we just had fun with it because we know a lot of self-help people. So you figure you're going to wake up the next day and you're going to go like, "Oh, man, what were we thinking?" But a month later, I'm still thinking about this crazy thing. So I decided to write it as basically a satire of self-help books. But once I started getting into it, I realized, oh my, there's a lot more going on here than I realized. So, but the humor helps because if you're talking about, someone says, "Do you want to read a book on suffering?" It's like, no, I don't want to read a book on suffering. Nah. But so you got to have the humorous because so much of the irony of life comes about by the tough things that we have to go through. And that irony and humor makes it palatable.
Mm-hmm. Makes it kind of counterbalances the heaviness maybe or dark kind of feelings for sure. Well, I'm going to talk just very briefly about stigma because I always just like to just explain to people, jumping away from the book for a second, but I think it's all kind of intertwined because actually I think there's kind of a stigma about suffering in a way, and it's kind of like good to just enlighten people, I think, and just have a conversation about that so that gets diffused and people don't feel so afraid of suffering. I welcome suffering. Now that sounds kind of weird, but if there's some kind of challenge, doesn't mean I want to feel icky or not healthy. But if there's something new or something like you're talking about, the unknown, sometimes actually, if you let things go a little bit and you follow that can actually lead to something, that's meaningful and where you're meant to go. But I think we get very fixated and stuck. And I think that, in a way, the stigma of suffering is maybe kind of a social stigma where we have attitudes or discriminating behavior that are directed toward individuals. I guess maybe people who have been sufferers, right? Maybe we stigmatize that idea of people who suffer are not who we want to be around or something. I don't know. It's just an interesting question. Like, that person's suffering. I don't want to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm talking about it with you.
Right. When you start actually, this is the thing I got into writing the book. When you really start thinking about it, you're like, well, why is that? If someone's suffering, it's almost like, is it contagious? Am I going to get it? Or it's like, I think a lot of it is you just, it's self-protection. Especially someone you care about, when they're suffering, you kind of empathetically take some of that on. So it's like, or it reminds you of something that you've gone through. So there is a certain thing where you kind of want to distance yourself from it.
It was interesting because I like to use the etymological dictionary, which is a dictionary that you look up, you can look up the root of the words. Mm-hmm. And somehow it came to me, I was doing my script for today. I thought, I'm going to look up suffering. Because
Good.
I was curious, like, where did suffering come from and where did surprise come from? But suffering is actually like a mid-13th century word that means to allow to occur or continue, permit, tolerate, fail, to prevent or suppress. Also, it can mean to be made to undergo, endure, or be subjected to. And it's interesting because what they kind of have in parentheses is pain, death, punishment, judgment, and grief. But also, I think it was replaced by the Old English, says Paulinian, Brownian, meaning submit meekly to. That's from the early 14th century. So it kind of converted into that, meaning to undergo or be subject to, be affected by an experience, be acted on by an agent. So maybe that's part of it, is like the idea like that somebody does something to us to suffer. Maybe that's part of where that comes from.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that, there's a tendency when something bad happens, and you're suffering because of it, to blame something. Oh, the fates did this. Oh, God did this. Oh,
Right.
my best friend did
Right,
this.
the finger pointing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's a sense that you're put upon because if you just let me be, I'd be fine.
Right, but like you're saying, some of the times we suffer, those actually lead to greater epiphanies, growth. So, I mean, maybe I was just thinking, maybe we have a misunderstanding even of the word suffering in a way. Because, I mean, we think it's okay to suffer if we go to the gym and do sit-ups, but like if we suffer in other ways, for some reason, that's not okay. So there's like these kind of stigmas in a way of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So suffering maybe even is demarcated in that way. I don't know. I was just kind of thinking maybe that's part of it too. And then the other stigma that I just go over just very briefly is the self-stigma, where the mental health sufferer internalizes their perception of discrimination. So even if we applied suffering, and I said, I'm suffering, and I know somebody else who suffered, and they really didn't enjoy it, and they really didn't, come out as well as maybe I would have liked them to or hoped for them to, then maybe I'll take that on myself. So I think it's really healthy to think for yourself, too, and kind of check in with yourself and see what your suffering is maybe, right? Because, I mean, everybody probably has different types of suffering.
Oh, yeah. As many types as there are people.
Ooh, that could be a good book.
Yeah.
You could do the different types of suffering. You know what I mean? Because it's kind of like a topic that's it is very taboo. I mean, William, what do you think your approaches are to suffering?
Well, personally.
It doesn't have, I mean, yeah. Just,
Yeah,
if you're open
that's
to
what's interesting. Well, it's evolved since I started this book. I mean, when I say people tend to avoid it and just push it away, I'm talking about what I used to do. But in the process of that, you always ask the question, why? What's the purpose of it? And I've really come to believe that the purpose of it is evolution, is change. And if you keep that in mind, it certainly gets better, because the times I've changed the most in my life is when I was really, really suffering. Mm-hmm. And then you just get to the point where you just go, I will do anything to get out of this state.
That's
and
true.
That anything is a change. Now, some people get to that state of anything and they take their life because, it's just life is so unbearable. But the idea is you can change. You can do something you normally wouldn't do to the suffering. So there's things I've done in the past, that patterns that I had, and I just never got around to breaking it. And then that pattern would come up with someone that I cared about and would really hurt them. And then at that point, I was like, okay, I will never do that again. So that point where you just say, okay, I am going to change because I never want to be in this state again because it's really miserable.
It's like a breaking point.
Yeah.
It's true. Well, I mean, I kind of liken suffering to like boogie boarding. Have you ever boogie boarded?
Boogie boarding?
Yeah, where you go in the water and you have that board, not a surfboard, but like.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I think I'm catching a little tickle in my throat, so sorry. I guess I think of uncomfortability or suffering in that way because it's kind of like you have to catch the boogie board. You have to paddle, which is kind of not super hard. You get on the board, but then, it gets pretty rough. Mm-hmm. And it you have to really hold on. But then at the very end, you kind of get to cruise out, and it's kind of more peaceful.
Right.
So it's true. It's just about learning to ride that uncomfortability too. I think, though, I was reading a little bit about the modern age of kind of the age of suffering, right? It's like it sounds like that's sort of the approach of that we've traded kind of the older physical modes of suffering for this kind of new age of emotional, mental, spiritual modes of suffering. And isn't that kind of what you were talking about a little bit too?
Yeah, that really in the past, hundreds of years ago, I mean, the people were so occupied by food, shelter, clothing, the basics. Hopefully the neighboring tribe wasn't going to come and wipe you out and steal your daughters and sons and stuff like that. So that was on a very basic level. And so now, at least in the first world countries, most of the anguish that we experience is psychological or emotional or spiritual or mental. It's internal. And so I think it's a type of evolution. So when you're just worried about eating, that's one thing. But now it's very different. And so these new modes that we go into because of that are coming out. So, for instance, mental health, no one 500 years ago ever talked about mental health. Mm-hmm. Maybe they were talking about, food. They weren't talking about mental health. And so the area of psychology has really blossomed in the last 120 years, right? And it's because now we can actually address that because the baser parts of our existence are more or less taken care of. Mm-hmm. But for me, that says that, well, now that the baser things are taken care of, now we're getting more to the internal things. Mm-hmm. And these are the things that are holding us back, that are keeping us from the evolution and changing. So I see it as a progress, but...
Do you think, though, with all the different conflict going on so many levels, in our world with climate change and healthcare and education, all these different things, I guess I kind of feel like everything's kind of, at a crossroads. And maybe people are more being forced to, like you're talking about, look more inward. Mm-hmm. And also maybe because the suffering is so great, maybe they're forced to look at what's really important to them, like relationships, self-care, love, those kinds of things, instead of how we've gotten so caught up in like consumerism and what's outside of us.
Right. Well, the whole thing, consumerism, doesn't work. I mean, the thing about fame and fortune doesn't work. There's these people who quote unquote have it all. A lot of money, fame, the public loves them and they go off and they take their own lives. That just says that, this idea of getting the stuff out there is not really going to do it for you folks.
It's true. Well, when I had Glenn Phillips, the guy that was in Tow the Wet Sprocket, he came on air and he said, I've been number one in the world in my, record, and I've had 10,000 people in a concert, and I've been on stage and totally felt super alone. So it just goes to show you it doesn't matter what you have as far as like people. And also, really, I do believe, you can tell me if you disagree, it's okay, the idea, I think we're kind of all alone in a way with ourselves, right? And I mean, because we have to listen to our own thoughts, our own body sensations, our own feelings. Now, we do have people around us, of course, mm-hmm. But ultimately we have to learn to kind of suffer like Deirdre was doing I'm not laughing at her. I'm just like, I think it's cute that she was laying there and said, I'm going to suffer, because she was taking care of herself, right? And she knew what she needed, and then she was allowing that to happen.
Yeah, and the thing that, I thought a lot about that, and and when I look at that whole little scene, I liked going back and sort of like analyzing it and what were the omens in that? What was the universe trying to tell me? And mm-hmm. and one of the things was that by her just really going into it as opposed to pushing it away, in 5 minutes she just suffered for a while, and after 5 minutes she was kind of bored.
It's true. Well, that's how suffering. I know. I think it's very anticlimactic. People think, oh my gosh, this is going to be enduring, long. But actually, sometimes suffering can pass. That's the boogie board idea. It can be momentary. But also, if we sink into something, we kind of work through it.
Right.
And then we can let it go.
Experience it and do that. And then the other part, the whole thing is then we started laughing. And of course, humor is great. Does all these physiological things for you, as you
Right.
know.
Yes.
So the humor, and 15 minutes later, we're in the kitchen. I order a little bit of wine, and we're laughing about this crazy book that I'm never going to write that I ended up writing. So there you have it.
How long did it take you to write that book? Was that a couple years ago?
It was about a year and a half.
Is that when she had her back?
Yeah.
So it was a year and a half. That was pretty fast, actually.
Yeah, and I was only doing it part-time. So, it wasn't like every day I get up and put in 6 or 8 hours. I mean, I would go and I'd get inspired and write a little bit and then not do it for a week.
I think there's a very intuitive part about suffering, too, because that's what I did my research on. And actually, intuition is a very important neurological function, deep in our brain, how we regulate ourselves. So I kind of think like you trusted this notion that you got about following the suffering, and then you just kind of kept following that, and here you are with this great book. So, it's just important to trust ourselves, I think, too.
Yeah.
And even if we have something that we're afraid of, it's okay to feel afraid, but it doesn't mean, like you're saying, we're not living in like caveman days where a lion, likely is not going to be chasing us, or like a tree is not going to likely fall on us. But, I think in our minds, we kind of get ourselves geared up for that. And then we don't allow ourselves to face whatever it is that we're suffering from. But as we were just talking earlier, surprise does trigger the release of dopamine, which is kind of the feel-good chemical everybody likes from our brain. And so when we invite those surprises into our lives on a regular basis, we can really elevate our mood. Is that surprising? Because it allows us to learn to be more tolerant of uncertainty, too, and that will help reduce anxiety. So I think all those factors really help our mental health. And actually, I think they've even said that it reduces depression. So with surprises, because surprise has a way of interrupting unhealthy. It's like we were talking about, interrupting that unhealthy thought process. William, I was wondering, from your experience, how do you think mental health and like discovering endless possibilities, I kind of took this from your movie a little bit, but discovering endless possibilities for altering your kind of everyday reality, how do those two kind of intersect? If you were allowing yourself to discover endless possibilities for altering your everyday reality and your mental health, how do you think those two kind of intersect?
Well, the one thing that I think impinges upon people's mental health is that feeling of being trapped, of being in jail, of being no freedom. And most of us humans want to be free. We don't like slavery. No one really likes that. So,
including with ourselves.
Yeah, true. So the idea of the endless possibilities is that if you can get very hopeless when you feel trapped, like you have no options. So the discovering that you have these possibilities, that there are things, there's other ways to lead your life to produce different results. Realizing that and really getting it in your bones, so you really get it, is very hopeful. I mean, I'm for some reason I'm thinking about Nelson Mandela, who, I mean, boy, there's a story. He was a radical, and they threw him in jail because he, blew some people up, and I mean, he did really bad things. And then he gets in jail, and he's locked up for what, a decade or two?
Yep.
But when he was in there, that's when his mind he was able to see other possibilities other than just being angry at the way the country was. And somehow during all that time he formulated, who would think in jail that you're going to go into these endless possibilities? Who would think when you're in jail you're going to eventually lead the country to a whole new era? And yet he did. So to me that's an example of like that the endless possibilities are there if you access them. So obviously he did a lot of inner work while he was there. I mean, there's nothing here in jail. There's not much.
He must have done a lot of evaluating and thinking, I would guess, wow, I'm really, like, I can't get much lower than this. I'm like trapped in a cell. I don't have my choice of food. I don't have my choice of clothes. I don't have any choices, And so, but he did have the choice, I guess, to work on his mind and overcome that, which, yeah, I think, well, it does take actual work. But the beauty behind that is then you get to feel a sense of inner peace.
Right. Yep.
And you don't have to feel afraid because you can say, it's okay if I suffer. I mean, and we're going to suffer every day because every day has suffering. It's just part of life.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there, doctor.
Sure.
Every day may have pain.
Yeah.
But every day doesn't necessarily have suffering because they're different.
You don't think people repeat their suffering that they haven't dealt with from the day before?
Some people do, but not everyone. I mean, I wouldn't say people suffer every day. There may be pain.
Well, isn't pain kind of like suffering, though? Like you're talking about, like if someone has physical pain. Sure. I mean, everybody, I think, is walking around in some kind of pain, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, financial, spiritual, right? That's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I have this concept in the book that I talk about. I mean, the famous Buddhist line is, pain is unavoidable, suffering is optional. And the idea is that they're really two separate things.
Okay.
And I came up with this theory that there's a threshold of suffering.
Uh-huh.
So as your pain increases, an example would be you stub your toe. Okay,
right.
Your toe hurts. Are you suffering? No, my toe hurts. Whatever. And then, the next day you get up and it's kind of swollen and it's like, ooh, it kind of hurts to walk.
It's like the aftermath or something of the pain.
But it's like, okay, well, it's just an annoyance, but whatever. You go on, and the next day your foot turns green, and now you can't go do the thing that night that you've been waiting for a whole year to do. Now you're suffering. Now, see, as the pain increases, you deal with it, and then there's a point at which it's almost like you hit a threshold, and then you're just miserable.
I can see that. I like that idea. I see what you're saying. There's kind of like different phases. It's like the Panama Canal.
Right. And
kind of sink into different phases.
Right. Athletes go through that. I mean, you think about what a world-class athlete will go through in order to get to that level. I mean, what they put their bodies through, you and I would be like, oh my God, this is horrible. This is, but they do it and not suffering. They feel the pain, but they don't suffer because they've said there's a greater something I'm going for. So the idea is that you can really set that boundary as to when you transition from just pain or just a inconvenient day to a day that's hell on earth.
So you're saying there's kind of this threshold between pain and suffering, where suffering is kind of an amplified, it's like you've crossed a line of demarcation.
Right.
Whereas pain is more innocuous, like it's like smaller or something.
Yeah, and it's something that you can not ignore, but let's say you have a toothache.
You might be able to overcome a little easier. Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can overcome it, and people have different thresholds.
Right. Well, because we're all wired a little bit differently, so everybody is a little bit different from birth.
Right.
That's true. But I mean, I guess I'm just digesting your idea about pain and suffering, and I'm thinking about, emotional pain. Because I mean, when people have emotional pain, though, that sometimes lingers on for long time periods.
Right. But sometimes there's a certain, I'm thinking in my past, there's a bit of a emotional pain of there's something that let's say that I wish I would have done that I didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Wish I would have done.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, it's painful, but I'm not really suffering over it. But there's things that I wish I'd done that I didn't do that I am still, that really just grabs me. Or something that I did to someone in the past that still, I still really feel bad about.
So you're suffering in respect to that.
Right. And to me, again, it's like, the little thing, I can put up with it, but there's a moment where it just suddenly is like, oh.
It's unbearable.
Yeah.
It's kind of like my compounding, theory of stress where it gets to be too big. Well, it's kind of intolerable, it sounds like, is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I was thinking, like, in the suffering, like, the idea that, we all, like, might have an injury, like we might hurt our knee, or we might have, like, an unhealthy childhood, or we might have a nasty boss, or an unfaithful lover, or a hurricane. There's always so many different ways that we can suffer that are just, like, right around the corner that can turn kind of a quote-unquote good day maybe into a bad day. But I mean, I guess you were talking a little bit about were you talking about chasing the dream in your book, or was that a different place I found that? Because I was looking up suffering, and I think it was talking about kind of how we're always just chasing this dream too. And then when we don't allow ourselves to suffer, right, we just kind of ignore that, and we just are, it's like we've got blinders and we're just kind of focused on this point that's so far away. We don't even notice what's happening in between here and there.
Well, that's what people do. They get obsessed.
Exactly. Well, I kind of do. I'm going to have to think about your idea. I do like that, though. I hear what you're saying. There is definitely, I'm sure, a threshold. You can feel that, too, in your body. Right. I just thought of an example,
personal example. I blew my knees out like 40 years ago running. And I love to run. I just love to run. And I blew them out on one race. And, I wake up the next day and they really hurt. And I'm like, oh, gee. And, I thought they would get better. And it was like, they were a bummer. And But a month later, I can hardly walk.
You're crippled, yeah.
So then I really suffered. And that went on for a while because, I could barely walk. So the pain was okay up to a certain point.
Right.
And then I started realizing all the things in my life I couldn't do because of this new condition. And then I was really miserable for a while. And I would watch a movie and I'd see someone, jump up and run over, do something. And I'm like, I can't do that anymore.
Sorry.
I can't do that. Oh, my God.
And then you start to realize even more. It's like reminders of how much you're suffering, and then you suffer more. Although, do you think if you would have, because that's so physical, though. I guess did you have to go get your knees repaired?
They tried operating on them, but it didn't work.
So how did you learn to kind of overcome that suffering? If you want to share. It's okay if you do. I was just thinking because it sounds like that was a big... And I think because it's like traumatic, too. You know what I mean? See how it's kind of lingers there, that feeling of just loss.
Part of it was, this... And stuff like that, eventually it becomes acceptance. At a certain point, you say, oh, look at all the stuff I can't do. Look at all the stuff I can't do. Look at all the stuff I can't do. And it's a mental pattern you go into. And there's ways to, get out of these states. And for me, it was like, well, you just better accept that we don't know that it's going to be that way forever, but it's that way right now. So nothing you can do, and beating yourself up over it's just going to make it worse. So there's a level of acceptance when you say, okay, that...
It's also like positive psychology, too. You start thinking, well, I can walk. You make you kind of make reconciliations for it. I can still use my knees. They still work. I just can't go on marathon runs.
Right.
So we kind of start making accommodations for that too. William, I was wondering, what do you think your work in the suffering fields does anybody talk about mental health with suffering, or is it more? When you go out and talk about your book with people, do you think people talk about it in relation to mental health, or is it separate?
Well, it's funny. It's talk about the girl in the room. It's right in the center of mental health.
Right, I agree.
It's right.
But do people actually talk about it? Like when you go and talk about your book, do you think people put that correlation together?
They don't use the term mental health.
Well, yeah. What term do they use?
Well, they just talk about the inner states, but they actually don't use.
I kind of think we need a new word for that anyhow. I was just curious because maybe there's a good word.
A new word for mental health?
Yeah, because it doesn't it's kind of outdated. I was kind of thinking maybe to have a new cutting edge word. Inner states, he said.
Let me think about mental, yeah.
Well, maybe, and even as you go out, and I know you've been doing a lot of interviews, and you're out with your book, putting your book out there, maybe there's people that you'll interact with that will be able to, maybe one person will bring up mental health or something.
When you think about it, it is such a huge element in mental health.
Suffering? Oh, yeah.
That's like, oh my God, it's like one of the, if not the, big things that drives mental health.
Or health. Right? Really, our well-being is really, I think, based in a lot of ways, it's true, on how we deal with suffering, how we look at suffering, how we, how we overcome it. It's true. I was just curious if people actually verbally talk about it, or, if it's just kind of that's also kind of the kind of big pink elephant in the room, too.
It's not taboo. It's like I think no one says it because it's like so much in the center of it.
Okay. So you think it's kind of a given, kind of, is what you're saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. I like that. I guess I can handle that. I guess I'm just hoping more people will just be more accepting too, because I mean, if we were more accepting of how that interchange happens, then it makes it past that. It doesn't make it such a big issue. You know what I mean? It makes it more accepting. How do you think that a person, William, how do you think a person receiving support from, like your book, like if they read the book, How to Suffer, or they went and talked to someone about how to suffer, how do you think that could help a person through like a mental health crisis? You know what I mean? Like you're talking about like with your knees, or I mean, other people have other things going on too, say a crises or those sorts of things.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the field of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, if there's something, people generally go see a therapist because they're upset about something. Something's not right. And the idea about going in there and talking about it is generally sharing it is good, because otherwise it just stays in the closet, stays in the unconscious or the subconscious where it wreaks havoc. So I think that, part of the thing of the book is, just bringing it out of the closet and saying,
which is great. Thank you.
Yeah, talking about it. And so the idea being the next time that you're suffering, you say, okay, that's what, yeah, well, how are you doing? Well, actually today I am suffering.
I was just reminding about how I think people have a fear of like appearing foolish or like ill-prepared, right? When we have suffering, it's like because it's the unknown. It's like we don't have the answer per se.
Right. Plus, you always want to put on a good front for people.
Right.
You want to say, oh, I'm doing well, everything's good. The kids are good. Great. Hey, I just got a raise.
Right.
Life's really
all the
good.
highly prized things we want to present.
Right.
But actually, in a way, like even if you think of like cavemen, I'm sure they suffered, making crops and their livelihood,
Mm-hmm.
But I think that made them also healthier because they learned to adapt, right? And to be able to take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. I was going to and we only have such a brief amount of time, and I could ask you so many endless questions. And I was just kind of looking up ways also for people. In your book, I know, do you probably give people tips on ways to bring more suffering in their life, or how to notice suffering in their life, or is it more just talking about suffering?
No. The first bit is the whole title of the book is How to Suffer in 10 Easy Steps.
That's what I thought. Right.
Yeah.
So there's 10 steps. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the steps that if you want to suffer, you do these.
Perfect.
And the idea being, of course, if you do the inverse, then you won't.
Okay.
The second half of the book is the 6 slippery steps to get out of suffering. And the 6 slippery steps is something like, let's say, attachment. Some people say, oh, just be non-attached and you won't suffer. The Buddhists are big on that. The trouble is it's a slippery step, because if you take it too far, I know people who are so unattached to everything.
They're very detached, yeah.
Yeah, they're detached. They're not even alive.
Mm-hmm.
And they're uncaring, and they can actually be mean because of, oh, get over it. You're just attached. That kind of attitude,
That's so true. We do have that very flagrant way of just saying that.
Yeah,
just get over it.
And then the other side of attachment is you're so attached to everything that basically, anything you can't even walk by the news because you'll cry for 3 days because you're so connected to everything. Mm-hmm. So it's a slippery step. You can go too far in either direction.
It's true. It's a balance.
It's a balance. And so that's why I have the 6 slippery steps in the second half of the book, because I get a little more serious. I'm like, okay, we've had some fun laughing at all this and yeah.
Yeah.
But, no one wants to suffer. So here's some ideas and techniques that people have, because humans have been working this one for millennium.
I know. It's probably it's so embedded in our genetic code, I'm sure. I did look up just some ways but I, in my practice, help people to suffer by just more the idea of self-acceptance, self-compassion. My new saying is that self-care isn't selfish, right? Because I think everybody thinks that they take care of themselves, they're selfish. And I think that includes suffering too. Like it's almost like we're not allowed to suffer. Do you know what I mean? We're not allowed to have feelings. We're not allowed to, or there's like a cap on how much we should suffer.
Right.
But I mean, I like what you did with Deirdre. We were talking earlier, if you're just listening, I'm here with William Arntz, and we're talking about suffering. And he was talking a little bit earlier about his wife, and she hurt her back, and she was laying, and she said, I just want to suffer. And I like how you were very tender, and also just, you kind of rode that out with her. You didn't push her like there was a demarcation line. She needed to get up and be done, right?
Right.
So it's kind of interesting because I think people get that way, and then maybe it takes them longer to get over suffering, too. But this idea of allowing ourselves to suffer, and I think that we're taught that vulnerability is a weakness, but actually vulnerability, all my mentors taught me, is a sign of strength. So by being vulnerable, we can open ourselves up to suffering. I think also being more curious is really healthy. And then also I like Margaret Mead, the cultural anthropologist. She talked a lot about novelty as being kind of the great upward human force, meaning, if you drive home a certain way, drive home a different way. If you walk in your house one way and you move around your house cooking your dinner, try it a different way, So just kind of all these different simple things. I was wondering, William, can you explain just a bit about, like if someone was listening and they were interested in going into the field of like writing or, investigating unusual topics, because there are a lot of UCSB students too that listen. How do you think someone could approach like the same kind of profession? I mean, it sounds like yours was such an evolution because you started out right as a physicist doing physics, and then how do you think that if someone's listening and they are kind of very set, like I must be a physicist, but then maybe they have other ideas in the back of their mind, to allow themselves to move through that? Do you have any tips for people who are listening?
No.
No?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to see if I could surprise you.
You did actually.
I did. Your eyes got big there for a second. Color to the cheeks. Yeah, I know. I thought we'd do a little real live demonstration.
Perfect. I love it.
Yeah. But I do have a. I'm
an experiment, and
I'm a troublemaker.
That's okay. I'm a live experiment.
Yeah, there you go.
That's okay.
So the thing that for me is I just don't have a fear of trying something new. Mm-hmm. When I did my first software company, I had written lots of computer code, but I never actually did a company. That's a whole different thing. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I just decided that, I'm going to go do it. When I did the movie, I had never really done movies, but I just say, I'm going to make a movie. And so I used to tell people, most of the people listening, if they're students, don't remember Spanky and Our Gang, but Spanky and Our Gang were these kids.
Yeah.
And hey, Spanky, what do you want to do? I don't know. Let's go build a thing to the moon. Okay, Spanky, let's go. So there was that.
That was the gang. What was that called?
No, Spanky and Our Gang was a TV thing.
Right. Okay, I remember the kid with the hair that stuck up.
Yeah. So the idea was that not having the fear, just going and trying something. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, they're like, well, I'd really like to write a book, but I don't know if I can. And so, you just write. I remember I did write a book back when I was in my 20s. I wrote a book, and I wrote the science fiction book, and I got the thing done. And I remember someone telling me, "Oh, you wrote your first book." I said, "Yeah, I'm really excited." Someone said, "Well, you'll eventually throw it away," which I did because it wasn't very good. But it's just practice. It's just practice. So you don't expect it to be a hit right out of the block. Well,
and also, your physics, did you kind of plan on doing physics for your whole life, and then it just kind of, the other pieces kind of bubbled up, and then you just followed that?
No, I didn't really plan on doing anything for
So it's kind of a very playful approach in a way. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I tell people, think of it like an experiment or kind of an adventure. Life is that way, too. It's kind of like an aerial view of the Colorado River. Have you ever seen a nice view of that? Mm-hmm. It's got lots of twists and turns and ups and downs. But there's kind of this play. I think you're talking more about having a playful kind of approach, right? And letting yourself kind of just be curious and go through that. William, I was just going to ask you a couple more questions, maybe. I was wondering, have you heard of any campaigns or organizations that work particularly in suffering?
No.
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 What about, have you heard of any campaigns that work like to reduce mental health stigma?
No?
No, I know. See, I always ask everybody that question. I think it's interesting how I always think the media, and you're definitely the media person, is such a great place to do that. You know what I mean? To have an outlet for disseminating that information. Like if there was a little TV snippet on suffering, or TV show or something. I don't know, because it's like all the shows are about feeling good usually. Although I do notice more shows having actual experiences of real life, like family conflict and those kinds of things. But I think it'd be great to infuse that idea of suffering, you know what I mean, into some campaigns or movies or.
Yeah, I don't really know of any because no one really talks about it directly.
I know. Well, maybe that'll happen though.
Yeah.
Well, I'm always trying to imagine a world where each person has the opportunity towards self-peace through the ability to overcome mental health barriers and obstacles to reach treatment. And I do think we need more just programs and media and just stuff to get all this information kind of out in the public. I was wondering, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with our guest, William?
Final words of wisdom.
Hmm?
Final words of wisdom. I don't really have any.
See, the element of surprise is right here.
Final words of wisdom.
Okay. Well, I think you did give a lot of good tips, but I guess we could check out, you have a website, right? If people are interested in learning more about your work.
Yeah, howtosuffer.me.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
oh, cool.
howtosuffer.me.
Howtosuffer.me.
Yeah.
And also, if you have questions, you're welcome to, write me on my Facebook page, The Dr. Deborah Show, and I can pass them along to William. But you can it looks like you could reach also him directly, and you might want to check out his movie and books. I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your wisdom with our listeners.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You said the time would zip right by, and it did.
I know. We could just keep talking. Well, maybe you'll come on again and elaborate even more. But I do think it's a great topic. You know what I mean? So I really appreciate you coming on because I think it's kind of like a new cutting-edge idea. So good job.
Yeah.
I think some ways we can work together to help create a supportive environment that can empower and care for each other and ourselves is we can volunteer, we can learn to check in with ourselves, we can learn from other cultures, we can get accurate information from accurate, reliable sources, not random scientific studies. And I think that this can lead to understanding, including, and caring. So I'm always trying to imagine a world where we can share our feelings and thoughts more freely and where we can move toward health for all human beings. So I think if we each do our part toward ending negative perceptions about health and raise awareness, we can live in a more loving, safe, and accepting world. I want to thank my very special guest, William, for coming in today and sharing his wisdom. Like I said, if you have any questions, please write to me on my Facebook page, The Dr. Deborah Show. We're live at KCSB FM Santa Barbara 91.9. Oh, and if you're next week, I'll be having the Montecito Fire Chief on. So you can listen in next week. We'll be talking about hugs and some other fun things. So I'll look forward to talking to you then.